All right, good evening, everyone. So I'm here this evening. I'm going to take you through a presentation that I am currently giving in my sleep. I've done it so many times. So this is a presentation very similar to the presentation we gave at Back to School Nights, as well as other opportunities throughout the last couple of weeks, and I'm sure will be given many more times. So the project, our title of the presentation is Building Our Students' Future by Reinvesting from Our Past. Just a quick summary of the project and what brought us here today. Over a year ago, we commissioned a facilities planning committee. This committee consisted of teachers, administrators, and community members. And it was really an opportunity to brainstorm how could we take advantage of what is ultimately a very timely opportunity while still being fiscally responsible. And it was really fun at first. We started brainstorming all the great things we wanted to do. We wanted to connect the buildings. We wanted to build an Olympic-sized swimming pool, maybe a stable for horses, and quickly realized that we were spending way more money than we could and really needed to ground ourselves in what was really current issues that we needed to address. So I highlight some of those issues, and I'll go in more in depth as we go through the presentation. But one area in which we thought really needed some attention was our cultural arts spaces, both at the elementary school, but particularly at the middle school. And just a few examples of what the issues are. The cultural arts space here at the middle school next door is too small to really hold any performances. Therefore, all of their performances are moved over to the high school PAC. And in terms of space for practice, at the elementary school, the students have access to soundproof lesson rooms to practice their instruments during lessons. And at the middle school, a large number of students come up from elementary school learning an instrument, and we simply don't have the facilities at the middle school to accommodate these students. That leaves, in some cases, students practicing for their lessons while sitting on the serving line of the cafeteria. The cafeteria and kitchen space are both too small. The cafeteria space means that students eat in shifts, so as a grade level of students moves to lunch, half the students start with recess, the other half eat lunch, and then they switch. That always causes issues in terms of who is with whose friends, and we're separating students. So a new expanded cafeteria is something that we're looking at, and kitchen space. Many don't realize that our middle school lunch is actually cooked here at the high school and wheeled over to the middle school, which certainly limits the offerings for our middle school students. Innovative and flexible classroom space, we'll talk a lot about that, but we currently have core academic subjects taking place in non-core academic classrooms, and that's an issue, and we certainly need more flexible space to support our curricular program. Health and Wellness Center is something that we'll dive into, but it's really to create both a physical and academic space for our students. Infrastructure upgrades throughout the middle school, which remains eerily familiar to when it was built, and a creation of a learning commons at the middle school, which is a modern library, and our middle school currently does not have a library for our students. Just some of the economics of the project. We estimate the principal cost of the project to be approximately $14.8 million. For anyone who's seen this presentation over the last few weeks, that's slightly higher. We actually got new quotes for the windows at our middle school that were higher than expected. So we slightly increased the project capital cost. Our estimated state aid, there's sort of been two numbers around in the community, so I just want to take this opportunity to clarify the difference between the two. The 6.3 number, which we actually will now go up slightly, now that the project cost is slightly higher, is the aid we'll get back that includes both the aid on the project principal as well as the aid on the interest. The other number, which we've shared, is the 4.9, which again, I imagine will go up now that the price of the principal cost for the project is slightly higher. And that 4.9 represents the aid we get back in relation to the principal cost alone. So both numbers are accurate, doesn't change the bottom line. We're just trying to be as transparent as possible. If we want to look at the aid number just based upon principal cost, 4.9 or slightly higher. If we want to look at the aid number based upon the total cost of the project, which includes interest, slightly higher, 6.3. To offset the increase in the cost to cover the windows in the middle school, we'll be taking $610,000 from our capital reserve fund. That's actually the entire purpose of that fund, is to offset costs for capital improvements. The project will be financed over 15 years. And really what the highlight of the whole thing is, the whole project is that everything that I'm going to share with you this evening can be accomplished without any increase in our taxes. And that was a non-negotiable amongst the Facilities Planning Committee. Whatever we decided to do or recommended to be done had to fall under the constraints, within the constraints of having no increase in taxes. So we hear a lot about the relationship between schools and home values, so I did a little research. I found 3 different research studies. I found one study that found that homes in desirable school districts are priced at $50 higher per square foot, that homes in desirable school districts are 49% more expensive, and that 91% of potential home buyers consider school boundaries as one of their primary determining factors. We're certainly at a crossroads as a district. We have, as I mentioned before, this opportunity to reinvest our debt and improve our instructional program, but we also have the option to do nothing and to allow the debt service to go back into the tax rolls. But there are some adverse effects if the latter were to happen. One is our debt service is directly related to the amount of taxes we can levy. So it's part of the formula that determines our tax levy cap. So the projects, many of which at the middle school, still need to be done. And in fact, if we have to do them out of our general fund budget, we no longer get any state aid back on those projects. And our general fund budget is already very tight, which means that if we're forced to fund improvements or maintenance on buildings, that money has to come from the same pool that funds our programs and staffing. So we ultimately could find ourselves in a situation where we're forced to maximize our ability to levy taxes up to the tax levy cap, as well as potentially competing interests between staffing programs and maintaining our buildings. So a quick rationale of the project. I'll skip the 1935 tour, even though it's my favorite, but that's when our elementary school was built, and it's beautiful, and it's had some major renovations over the years. But we were going to dive right into 1972, which is when our middle school was built. Part of the fun of preparing for this presentation was digging through the archives, and I found lots of old fun stuff. So this is the original rendering of the middle school from 1972. I have to be honest, it looks better in the picture. But if we dive down into 1972, things were obviously very different. So just some quick facts from 1972. Dow Jones topped 1,000. The Ford Pinto was the most popular car, costing $2,078. Gallon of gas was 55 cents, not bad. But the work environment in the 70s was certainly very different than the work environment we have today. Individuals sat in desks, normally in rows, facing forward, awaiting direction. On the right, we have a picture of some modern technology being used from 1972. And our learning environments very much mimicked what the work environment was, and students sat in desks, in rows, facing forward, awaiting directions from the teacher. So before we go into modern day, 2018, we'll take a quick stop in the 90s, because who doesn't love the 90s? So our work environment, again, very different. This is the heyday of the cubicle. Now, rather than waiting for directions, we're now sitting still in the same rows, still facing forward, but now we're telling the computers what to do. The learning environment looks remarkably similar to the 70s. We're still sitting in rows facing forward. And other important things happened in the 90s, like I was in 6th grade in Putnam Valley. And if you look at the picture on the right, you'll fully understand why I started shaving my head. So this is our middle school in 2018. But a lot of things have changed in 2018. Our work environment no longer asks individuals to sit in rows and face forward, and it's a much more creative and collaborative space that asks students to think critically, to solve problems. So therefore, we think it's important that our learning environments mirror the work environment that our students will be entering. And students need to learn how to be successful in this type of environment if ultimately they're going to be successful in their future work environment. So as I mentioned before, part of the project is a learning commons at the middle school. This is really a modern library. I like to call it an academic place of gathering. And for anyone who's been to the high school, which has a beautiful learning commons, that room is packed every period of the day with students that are either reading, working collaboratively, finishing homework, working with teachers. It's really a place for academic studies to happen. Sorry. So this space would mirror that. It would be a space for circulation, for study. It would also include an additional classroom space, but really serve as a research center. As I mentioned before, our cafeteria and kitchen would have an expanded capacity. This would increase our flexibility to use the space. Movable walls would allow us to partition it off. A new kitchen would allow us to cook food on site, which would increase our food offerings. And here's a rendering of our existing cafeteria and what it could potentially look like at the conclusion of this project. From a cultural arts, it would be an increased viewing area. So again, this is that same space now set up for performance. The pillars that you see in the picture are where the existing walls are. So you would see the wall between the existing cafeteria and the band room and the choral room would be removed, open it up to the exterior wall, which would allow us to put in windows and bring in some natural light. The existing wall between the cafeteria and the courtyard would be removed, and that's where it would be both part of the cafeteria as well as our learning commons area would be built in the existing courtyard. So here's a rendering that shows where that work is being done. So again, here's the existing wall that partitions off the cafeteria from the band space. Here's an existing wall that ends the cafeteria and begins the courtyard. So this whole piece right here is the only change in footprint for the building. That would be new construction. I believe it's approximately 4,000 square feet, and part of that square footage is the social commons, the learning commons, and a new flexible classroom here. Sorry. Going back in time. So also included from a cultural arts standpoint, it would be upgraded audio and visual on the stage. So we would do some upgrades to make it more conducive for performances. We would create a new choral space and install new soundproof lesson rooms. And if you look at the picture on the very bottom, that's a picture of our students practicing their saxophones while sitting at the serving line by the cafeteria. So as I mentioned before, the middle school is remarkably familiar to what it was when it was built in 1972, and certainly when I was there in the 90s. So it's in desperate need of just some general infrastructure upgrades. So one thing that we would certainly do would be upgrading bathroom facilities. That's an actual picture of a faculty bathroom at the middle school. You may notice you actually physically sit on the sink in order to close the door to use the bathroom. The next picture is a side-by-side comparison of a potential rendering of what the middle school may look like after the project, and next to it, what it looks like now. I can't wait for the day that canopy is torn down. Upgrades to our gymnasium, which is really just a facelift. We're not changing the square footage of the gymnasium, but these pictures show the old wooden planks that are broken, in some cases insulation coming out, and the bright yellow rafters up above with names on them from when in the 90s they let us climb a rope and sign our names up on top of those rafters. So if you look closely, you could find a J left up there. So window replacements at the middle school, some HVAC improvements. We're exploring the possibility of a covered walkway between the buildings, but really we're looking to find more effective use of the current space at our middle school. As I mentioned before, it's important that our learning spaces mirror what our workspaces look like. So there's money dedicated to create new spaces at the elementary school as well as the middle school. At the elementary school, we would look to create new flexible learning classrooms, which include the creation of a STEM room, so a room dedicated towards science, where teachers can sign out and bring their students for experiments. There would be upgrades to the auditorium, as well as small group instructional space and additional classrooms at the middle school, and specifically at the elementary school, a real focus on bringing the outdoors in. So this was my favorite slide to show at the elementary school back to school nights. So this is a picture of the graduating class of 1948, which is inconsequential other than the fact that they're standing on the stage of the elementary school, which looks identical to today. And then I asked the audience members to look at the seats they're sitting in, which are also identical to this picture and our original folding chairs from 1935. So no one can question the craftsmanship of that day. The last piece of the project is the Health and Wellness Center. Now, this is a space for both physical education and health classes. It's a space for interscholastic sports, for a practice space. Specifically, we're looking to address needs of our cheerleading and wrestling teams. They're currently relegated to practicing in hallways and in cafeterias and in space that is certainly not conducive to their sports. So this would be a space, a dedicated space for them to use practices, as well as other teams, both in season and out. And I really like to think of it as an academic classroom. As a former physics teacher, I would be in this space every day. We are asking teachers to become more and more active, asking teachers to allow their students to be more and more active learners. And I see teachers in the hallways, in their classrooms, moving desks aside to do experiments and to really get students up and moving. And this would really be a space that would be conducive to that type of learning. It would be a space that would also be available for community access to support our youth sports programs. I myself chauffeur my 2 young boys all over Westchester and Putnam County to indoor turf facilities, and this would certainly be a space conducive for their needs. And that's a rendering of what the inside of the building may look like. As I mentioned, it would be an AstroTurf floor. We could partition it off with nets. You see on the right-hand side, there's room for a little running track around the outside, and we could partition it in half to allow both cheerleading and wrestling to happen at the same time. It would also meet some of our storage needs, where we have mats hidden under stairwells and in cafeterias. We would have a dedicated space for those mats. So just some important dates. In August, we commissioned the State Education Department to conduct an environmental study. We've got the results back from that study and approved them at a board meeting in September, where there was no environmental impact found for the project. There'll be continued board discussions throughout the fall. The last day to register to vote is November 29th. Our anticipated vote date is December 4th. We anticipate construction beginning sometime in the spring of 2020 with an anticipated completion date of the fall of 2021. Oops. So the last piece is really just inviting the community to get involved. We recently commissioned a project implementation committee. We met in September and discuss ways to make sure that we get accurate information to all constituents across the community. So if anyone wants to get involved who's watching this online, can contact Jeannie DeNike, or if they have any questions, they're more than welcome to contact me, and I'll be happy to take them through any of the specifics, or I'll pass them off to my colleague, Jill, who could take them through the financial pieces.